Today I'm reviewing 8 underrated manga and comics. These will span different genres, but they're all originally written in English, they have a definitive manga influence, and they're independently created. Full disclaimer, no one here is a sponsor, although a few of these mangaka provided me with free copies of their work for the purpose of review. So friends of MangaTube, BookTube, and AniTube, let's get started. I'd like to kick things off with my personal favorite of the bunch, Bite Mark by Michael Stinson and Devin Muse. Official summary. Life as a corporate drone couldn't kill Mickey, but this might. Our story opens in 2023 in an East Coast city where a mysterious beast has hunted for the better part of a decade. Following in the tradition of classic horror tales like An American Werewolf in London, Ginger Snaps, and The Howling, Bite Mark is our take on werewolf lore. Although treated like a curse by some, lycanthropy is a superpower, a means to reinvent the identity of our protagonist through bestial strength and instilling fear at just a glance of the furry mutated form. This blood-shedding power is tempting to a timid office drone like our protagonist Mickey, who's trampled upon by her Type A co-workers. End quote. If you've never read an OEL manga or international manga, Bite Mark is a fantastic place to start. I absolutely love what I read, and I would be eager to nominate it as an ambassador for OEL manga. OEL manga is in an interesting place. I go to it because it's offering a unique perspective. They're different from Japanese-grown manga, and in a completely different universe from the stuff influenced by or made in opposition to mainstream Anglosphere or Franco-Belgian comics. It's mostly indie, a little rough, but wholly different. Which means it is very difficult to recommend. Most OEL manga is self-published, so that comes with the same quirks as webcomic publishing. There's plenty of authors abandoning their series, slow updates, and getting to a volume 1 may take years. I see this as a perfectly reasonable trade-off. Getting a look into this niche, outsider art means not all of it will have the steam to execute their complete vision. That sucks, but it's part of the deal. So I was delighted to find Bite Mark. The author reached out for a review and provided a copy of their work. It wasn't a chapter 1, no, here's my idea. He slapped a whole-ass graphic novel on my desk. And Bite Mark is a complete story. I forgot which manga editor or gymnastics coach said it, but starting a story is easy, sticking the landing is the hard part. And this is a story with an incredibly satisfying ending. Other than just being an OEL that tells a complete story, I'm also voting for this to be an OEL ambassador because it hits a lot of the bigger tropes of OEL manga. 1. The art is unquestionably manga-shaped, but lacks refinement found in professional Japanese manga. 2. The story seems heavily influenced by tropes and storytelling conventions outside of manga. Bite Mark describes itself in the afterword as a cabin horror. It feels like it's shaped more by Save the Cat rather than the Shonen Jump Guide to Making Manga. And 3. The protagonist is a woman of color, and it's not afraid to touch on oppression. This felt like an indie horror movie delivered in manga form, which is why I could see this breaking past an audience of just OEL manga readers. Now, I'd like to touch on the perceived queer elements of this story because my gaydar unexpectedly broke when I pointed it at myself, so hopefully I can outsource this work to the comment section. I'm not sure what's the authorial intent in Bite Mark, but I also don't think that entirely matters. If you like the eerie feels, you'll like the interactions between the two female protagonists. If you're a little more old school, you could just see this as two gals being pals. The afterword left me even more confused. It reads, coming-of-age stories in films like Adventureland and Blue is the Warmest Color influenced the major themes in Bite Mark. These stories of young individuals growing into themselves showed me that our experience during adolescence are just one chapter of our lives. A phrase that I read somewhere, though I can't remember the source, went along the lines of, a profound friendship between two women is like a romantic relationship. With this subversive concept in mind, we built the relationship between Mickey and Anna. End quote. Subversive is right. Things constantly feel kinda gay between Mickey and her coworker Anna, but I'm not sure if this is just reflective of how women can be a little more touchy-feely with each other or if exclusively reading light novels inebriated my critical thinking skills. If it matters, this story was not tagged as LGBTQ on Global Comics. But what's thoroughly pleasant is that I don't feel like I'm being queer-baited, ship-teased, or deceived. I also don't feel like this was done to meet a quota or done as a marketing ploy. That is, I can't see this being written to parade around the protagonist as shonen manga's first black lesbian protagonist. These character interactions unfold very naturally to the point where it feels incidental if it is supposed to be gay. A lot of guys rolling their eyes over quote-unquote woke storytelling will swear if they don't care if a character's a lesbian, they just want a good story, and that we'd all be happier if characters could just be gay without making it their whole personality. And on the other side of the fence, we'll see guys in the LGBTQ community saying they're sick of gay characters having one throwaway line to confirm their queerness. Like it was cool when they did that in Paranorman, but that movie's ancient now, and it'd be nice to have gay characters that show their gayness in ways that can't be edited out for a release in China. I know that these are false equivalents since the former is usually annoyed by adult-oriented shows on Netflix and the latter is annoyed by the shit Disney's churning out on its factory line. But if I could use one of my monkey paw wishes to make these two strawmen into real boys, They both agree that Bite Mark does it right, and this manga will also feel very right for Agretsuko fans. There's some superficial comparisons to be made between Bite Mark and Agretsuko. Both protagonists are meek office ladies, they get pushed around at work, their boss is a misogynistic creep. But that's all window dressing for why this felt so much like Agretsuko. Agretsuko is a kick-ass show, one of the many reasons being that it articulated an incredibly specific feeling of young adult ennui. At its core, Bite Mark addresses a similar ennui, along with a more pronounced social and existential anxiety. Much like Agretsuko, Bite Mark handles this issue in a way that's incredibly thoughtful and sincere, without ever getting too sappy or melodramatic. And disclaimer, I have not watched the final season of Agretsuko, because I am not ready, and it ranks among one of my most rewatched animes. But I know Agretsuko is not perfect, because if it was, we'd have Haida, Tadano, and Himuro as a polycule. Common one-star reviews of Agretsuko include: the plot spins its wheels, the characters go nowhere, why doesn't Retsuko quit her job, Veniko is underutilized, why is Haida such a little bitch, why does Atan, the largest of the office, simply eat the others. These are all fair critiques, but they've never dragged down my viewing experience because Agretsuko as a complete package gives me something I can't find anywhere else. Bite Mark doesn't have a lot of these same issues, and it approaches its problem of ennui in a very different, less Japanese way. If we're comparing the emotional core of both series, there's one pretty big difference. Agretsuko as a series plays a lot with a Honne Tatemae duality, the concept that a person's true feelings are different from what they show to the world. Much of Agretsuko relies on changes in perception for plot development, so in that sense it's less about a concrete character development and more about revealing different sides of its characters so the audience can be keyed into the bigger picture. In other words, I forgive any one-star review that may have missed this cultural nuance. Bite Mark is more concerned with bridging the gap between internal and external modes of expression. In that sense, it felt a lot more American in its approach to the same problem. It was remarkable how much Bite Mark's protagonist's anxieties reminded me of Retsuko. So if you found yourself sick to tears with Retsuko's bootlicker shogunai attitude, Bite Mark is the dream rewrite you've been looking for. Now, a note about the art. It's funny we got this far into a review without me bringing up the art, because I usually have a lot more to say about a manga's visual delivery. This is a rare instance where the writing was so captivating it took me a minute to become attuned to what's visually happening. But I don't want to dismiss the art completely. There is something very unassuming about this manga's visual design, which made it all the more surprising when the supernatural horror elements kicked in, and it was definitely able to deliver on the more gruesome scenes. So for the purposes of telling its story, it definitely works. However, this manga is held back by weak anatomy. This is not something I say lightly since I strongly advocate style over substance. And before I dig in too hard, let me say what I really loved about Bite Mark's art. The screenshot usage is creative but very tidy, and the page layouts are thoughtful. There's a good variety in the types of pages and panel layouts, but there is never any confusion over how to read the page. The staging of each scene is careful and dynamic, and there's overall strong pacing, which is vital for a horror story. It's a manga that has professional level polish in everything except anatomy. This style feels like it's someone who jumped into making manga before learning the fundies and kept themselves propelled by their sheer love of manga. I say this because that's been my attitude when it comes to manga making, so I might just be off base and just like projecting or something. But if I had to guess, that's how you get an art style like we see in Bite Mark. And this mindset is not at all uncommon, especially with OEL and webcomic guys. For better or worse, this is something that pops up a lot in this world, furthering my stance that this is a solid OEL ambassador. I'd like to bring to the stand the Mangaka 1. He's used as a common shorthand for the sentiment, you don't need technical proficiency to make a good manga. He wasn't the first or the only, but right now, he is the most notable. Part of his appeal is the crazy dynamic action. When the proverbial camera is being whipped around on a string, that dynamic action can compensate for the crudeness of the character art. The issue with Bite Mark is that it's not crazy enough to justify the rougher character art. And that's not to say, make it flashier. It's a cabin horror story, and the mise-en-scène was expertly handled. It's also not so bad it's distracting or laughable unless you really want to be a jackass and nitpick panel by panel. This is an artist with a unique vision and style. So I won't even say, maybe next manga they'll ramp up the action. They don't need that, at all. Whatever masters of old they studied to understand pacing and staging definitely worked, and they shouldn't feel like they have to mold their style into something it's not. If there is any chance that this artist stumbles onto this video, I would beg them to study anatomy, do gesture studies, anything to make your characters feel more grounded. This is an artist who's just on the cusp of greatness. They understand all of the intrinsic pieces of manga making that you can't just sit down and grind out with practice. So now is the time to ramp up the practice. And one more note about Bite Mark. This is a story that could easily work as a short film. It's cheaper to make a comic, sure, but the entire reading experience felt very cinematic. I will say one unique benefit of this being delivered as a manga first has to be that the initial trust between Mickey and Anna feels easier to believe. When we're introduced to Anna, we see she's boldly decorated her desk with waifu figures that border on inappropriate for the workplace. And I love it. I'm reading this manga because I like manga, so I find it easier to accept that the chick with anime figures is a good guy who would stick up for the socially anxious protagonist. It's half reader wish fulfillment and half playing with the reader's meta understanding of otaku culture. But this shortcut to trusting Anna might be lost in another medium. So if you want to check out Bite Mark for yourself, it's available on Global Comics. I will urge you to buy this only because I desperately need to see this team create more manga. Next up, we have Penguin Boy by Martial Arts, published through Lumbento. Here's the official description. In the land of Edifir, Alba, a young boy with a penguin as a grandfather, embarks on a transformative journey of self-discovery and adventure. Guided by his grandfather's teachings in the art of combat, Alba begins his quest by utilizing his skills to defend and assert himself among the inhabitants of his home island. End quote. First thing first, yes, this is a furry manga. This manga has furries, which immediately puts it above all manga without furries. Check out this stunning crowd shot. Furry characters help keep everything visually distinct, unique, and show off their personality a little more vibrantly than human characters. But that could be said about any series with furries, so I'll be real here. Martial Arts isn't a puritanical, sex-phobic weirdo, meaning he's not afraid to make some of the women curvy, but this is still 100% a shonen manga and nothing fanservice-y happens. It really is just a tiny detail that I was quick to pick up on because I've been so profoundly hurt and damaged by the pervasive neutering of mainstream Western media and the trickle-down effects this has had on small-scale American artists. I was cheering for the beauty of the First Amendment when I saw the tiniest sliver of cleavage on that horse chick in the background. Character design that moves me to tears is automatically a 10 out of 10. Mailing Unit 23 shows off Martial Arts design philosophy the best. Everyone here has that perfect balance of being really cool and really cartoony. So it reminded me a lot of One Piece. Although I was a bit confused about who's Vesper, Lynx, and Ishii, but more about the typesetting later. Because I'd like to state my main thesis. This manga kicks ass. I'm focusing on chapter 1 for this review, and this chapter stands at a whopping 121 pages, half a tankobon. It's a fitting start for a deeply ambitious manga, and that's the ultimate deciding factor for if you'll enjoy Penguin Boy. Do you want a manga that's a bit rough and unpolished, but deep in ambition? Then this manga is perfect. You will have a great time. If this was broken into shorter chapters, this would be easier to consume and understand, but I don't know. I can't critique it too hard for what feels like a feature, not a bug. It's a manga with explosive energy and experimentation, so I could honestly just imagine this was the result of Martial Arts being so enthused to draw manga that he just kept adding shit. Which is cool. This is the kind of high energy joy I want to see in art. And there's a lot of shots that are, by all technical definitions, wrong. They're a bit janky. Take this panel, for example. The longer I look at it, the more I feel it breaking apart, but I wasn't thinking of the technicality of point perspective while I was reading and absorbed in the moment-to-moment. Instead, it stood out as a shot with dynamic framing. There is always something happening on each page. It's the sort of high energy but deliberate pacing and camera work that reminded me of Dr. Stone or One Piece, without ever feeling derivative. This reads as the work of someone who is deeply conscious of the art of manga, who is expressing their vision with an expert level knowledge of this art form. So I feel a bit conflicted wondering how this manga could be improved. Everything seems to be done by hand, for better or worse. For example, let's take a look at this panel. The hatching to imply leaves and greenery doesn't particularly add anything, and it might look a bit more polished if it was rendered with a leaf brush. Here's a 10-second example done in Clip Studio so you know what I'm talking about. But this is the sort of thing that is deeply subjective, and plenty of artists will say that these shortcuts can outright ruin a manga. Maybe that's not the look the mangaka wanted, and it's easier to form a more consistent visual language if you just stick to doing it all yourself. It might be too much of an eyesore to, say, use 3D default village fantasy house in the background, but hand render a more specific building later. And since my own art is an awkward mishmash of assets, maybe this is my own inner crab in a bucket talking. And would you tell Miyazaki Natsujike to clean up her work? Fuck no. Never. The magic would be destroyed if she did that. What's more is the shot in question is still visually solid. Let's take a closer look. Alba in the foreground stands out with the screen tone, looking at his furry friends in the distance. The windmill makes a subtle but interesting division between the group, who Alba will eventually join, so the staging works as very subtle foreshadowing. In addition to the windmills, we have smaller buildings in the distance dotting the landscape to give a greater sense of depth. So in that utilitarian sense, this art style accomplishes what it set out to do. There's really no need to give it that extra shine. It has the frantic energy of an intense storyboard, so adding these hypothetical extra visual elements might weigh it down. Now, some tiny notes about the typesetting. One thing that could level up this work is a greater attention to detail to the text. It's good in the sense that everything is visible, readable, and the sound effects are dynamic and varied. But there's little things that make it feel flatly amateur. Here's an example. The speech bubbles are slightly uneven, and man, that Albany Island Boy character in Infobox feels very visually cheap. I'm not particularly well versed in typesetting, so I don't know how to correct this. I just know it feels wrong. So if any extra hands are added to this pot, and as far as I know, this was made without any editors or assistants, I would say get someone else to fine-tune the lettering before it's published. This wouldn't sacrifice the artistic integrity or personal style, but a lettering upgrade would make this feel a notch more professional. And yet, it does a lot right. Please do not take my pointing out janky text boxes as a complete dismissal of the way this manga uses words. Like I said, this dialogue is easy to read, and the sound effects are nuanced and dynamic. This is especially important with all of the fight scenes. You're never slowed down by a talk no jutsu in this manga. Everything keeps flying by, and any dialogue coexists perfectly with the art. You very rarely get more than one sentence in a dialogue balloon, which adds to how quick and easy this is to read. The biggest thing that will make me throw a manga directly in the trash is when you front load the readers with the lore. Little typesetting details, and anatomy, and detail rendering are minor fixes that will improve with time. They figured out dynamic, fast pacing, so it starts explosively fun. Oh yeah, about the plot. I forgot to mention the plot. It's a totally fine, completely acceptable shonen storyline. So far, nothing crazy has happened. This is something I'm reading for the moment-to-moment visual experience. Maybe someone who grew up watching Dragon Ball would vibe with this plot a little bit harder. I'm sorry I keep saying it, but I'm not religiously into shonen the same way most OEL guys are. There's plenty of experimental manga where hesitant readers will push through and stick around for the unique storyline. But unfortunately, I cannot see this happening with Penguin Boy. In other words, if you thought this was ugly from the panels I posted, I can't see you getting anything out of this. But I won't dismiss it completely. Just think of how many shonen manga don't totally find their footing until a few volumes in. It has the potential to evolve into something bigger, but right now the plot is just sort of a white noise for a deeply unique visual manga. I will still encourage anyone on the fence to give it a try, because I do have a good feeling about this manga. Penguin Boy is available to read for Loom Bento members. You can find it at loombento.net. And if you're on the fence about being an early adopter, I'd recommend you take a peek at their YouTube channel to see what they're up to. Martial Arts also has his own YouTube channel, and he gives a lot of good insight to current manga events. Everything's going to be linked in the description. Next up, we have The Last Day by Zero for Hire. Here's the official summary. The Last Day is a sci-fi action thriller about the end of the world. But we don't start there. We start with two friends, Steve and Silas. They want to find out more about the new full dive VR arcade that has come to their town. But this is also the beginning of an adventure that will ultimately lead to the end of the world. I'd like to start with complimenting the character designs. The protagonist, Silas, has a design that perfectly balances cute and cool. He has big glittery eyes that make him the perfect character to express sincere wonder and excitement over the VR arcade, but his design is versatile enough that he never devolves into being a helpless, doughy moe blob. His outfit's personality and role in the story are definitively masculine, but he has a softness to him that never makes him too aggressive. In that sense, he reminded me of Kirito. Never mind how many Kirito lookalikes there are nowadays. Think back to 2012 when SAO was in its first season of anime. If you were in the target demographic for Sword Art Online, Kirito was either cool enough to be an aspirational badass or cute enough to be your dream date to prom. Silas struck that perfect cross-gender appeal that I haven't seen in an action-oriented OEL since Radiant. I will also note that I'm a big fan of his hair texture. It's a tiny detail, but it makes him stand out. Even in this new era of diverse manga, this specific type of wavy hair is still a bit difficult to find. The last character I can think of with similar hair is Sai Nanami, the late-stage addition to Dr. Stone. Funny enough, the protagonist was actually inspired by 80s era Michael Jackson. The author shared a fun post about it on his Substack and even had a Michael Jackson impersonator sign his comic, which is unbelievably cool. Now, if I may pivot to the overall aesthetic and visual design, this is a comic with expert level rendering, with the same professionalism as anything in Shonen Jump or Weekly Shonen. I was surprised how little came up when searching for the artist, Lilika Aoi. There was a Fiverr page and a few social media accounts, so if you buy a commission from them now, you will get infinite bragging rights that you discovered them before they hit the mainstream. This type of digital footprint is standard for many artists, but I was expecting the first web result to be Viz Media announcing a release date for their newest tankobon, not a Fiverr page. Not to dismiss the fine artists of Fiverr, but with this skill level, they are definitely a hidden gem. I kept looking over the pages while writing this review, trying to find my usual pedantic nitpicks to ham up for the sake of comedy. But I can't. Every page is absolutely stunning. Characters, backgrounds, outfits, monster design, these are all expertly done. I never get the sense that there's any particular min-maxing of the artist's skills. What's more is the actual page layout is very clean and very easy to read. The fight choreography makes the punches hit hard and the character beats rewarding. A particular artistic strong point is the usage of screen tones and beta ink to render shadows. The base level inking is striking on its own, but there's plenty of creative digital effects and expert use of screen tones. Here's an especially beautiful panel that was featured in their digital promo. We see the different effects and textures weave in and out without ever feeling weighed down or cluttered. And this isn't the only instance of creative texture lighting inking effects, but these are best experienced in the moment as you are reading the comic. And after all these compliments, let me slow down and say something I wasn't crazy about. This style of dialogue may not be for everyone, but I found it perfectly serviceable. That is to say, it is a tad awkward. It probably unintentionally has the vibe of an anime fansub or scanlation, which might be a deal breaker for some readers, but if you grew up with the stuff, it'll be no big deal. Look, I will take awkward scanlation writing style over the Marvel Millennial, so that just happened writing style any day, so this comes down to a matter of preference. While most of it was mostly fine, this particular line stood out as especially corny. Yikes, this game is no joke. I didn't know I was going to get hurt for real. That is the exact panel I became aware of the crunchy dialogue and burst out laughing. Fortunately, it's closer to the end of the chapter, so it didn't drag down my first time read through. Where the dialogue's writing style actively hurts the plot is Silas and Steve's interactions. I didn't realize that they're supposed to be friends until I read the comic's plot summary, since the dialogue has that jankiness to it. Hopefully we can eventually see more character building moments so the audience can believe that they're besties. Otherwise, Steve's role feels closer to that of a nagging mom. And why the heck is Silas besties with a nagging mom? What happened there? Either way, things do start rolling in future episodes. I'm fortunate to have been a beta reader for the upcoming issues. Zero for Hire even shared a script with me, and I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. The plot expands and becomes much more grandiose. I won't spoil anything since it was just a rough draft and the final version could change, but I loved it and I'm really excited to see where this story is headed. I'd also like to share another interesting tidbit about this manga. This is a Christian manga, which you might not pick up on immediately, and definitely not in the first chapter. I know a chunk of my audience leans more conservative since my first big video was a critique of the Daily Wire's Mr. Bircham, and right-wing viewers are the most personally annoyed when Daily Wire flubs up. And this frustration comes up a lot, this general feeling that conservative art tends to come off as kind of dorky or just wanting a right-leaning story that doesn't preach politics. If you're someone in this camp, regardless of how you align religiously, this is a project you will want to support. The way the story approaches religion is very tasteful, so much that it feels like a modern-day anime-inspired Chronicles of Narnia. So I know it can break past that micro-niche audience of Christian guys who exclusively engage with Christian media. So I want to share a Substack note that Zero for Hire shared. And by the way, this is all public, I'm not leaking DMs. He said, I don't know if this will blow your mind, but I think the most interesting thing about creating a Christian comic is trying to avoid the same old tired tropes, while coming up with something that sticks to a biblical worldview. It's especially difficult in science fiction. I'm going to be playing with a lot of ideas this year, and very soon we will start releasing a new page every week, which is why I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to preview my new comic book, The Last Day. Imagine a comic book that's a mix of Battle Angel Alita, The Matrix, and Trigon all mashed together. Imagine a world where no one has heard about God for more than 300 years, and suddenly you're the one to meet him. Imagine a story rooted in biblical worldview that gives cool explanations for monsters, superpowers, and all kinds of cool sci-fi cyberpunk-style tropes without trying to rehash the Tribulation Force / Left Behind series or just straight-up retelling Bible stories. Imagine a story that has action, adventure, psychological horror, superheroes, and still deals with eschatology in a way that will change you like never before. So I piped in with this. Hearing that this is a Christian comic makes this all the more exciting. From the first issue, I didn't get that impression at all. You're taking your time with the world building and laying the groundwork, and I have a good feeling this will pay off in big ways. So he replies with this. I appreciate that you could see my worldview. Realistically, when God first touches your life, you don't always see the immediate results. A lot of times you won't even notice until things become obvious and perhaps you could see it retroactively. Also, God often works through people who are even Christians in order to achieve his ends for the greater good. I think too many people ignore these 2 points about life and they use Christian comics as a mode of propaganda or some sort of proxy for their mental illness. I'm really not trying to do that. Nobody enjoys being propagandized. I also have to be very careful about the kind of things I say before I start releasing this story in its fullness because I don't want to ruin the surprise. But also, I intend to craft the lessons that are learned in the stories the same way that I explained above. I'd like the reader to be able to retroactively understand the story I've been telling all along without feeling cheated. It's a difficult task, but I'm willing to take it on. I just thought it would be responsible of me to start talking about it more publicly so that 1, other Christians can hold me accountable, and 2, people who are completely turned off by Christianity can opt out before we start getting into the meat of the story. Again, I'm not a propagandist. End quote. This is easily the best pitch for this comic, so I wanted to scream it into a megaphone. Okay, this concept of nobody's heard of God for 300 years and he presents himself, like, that is fucking cool, dude. Like, I want to see that. All right. So you can find out more about The Last Day and Zero for Hire at thelastdaycomic.com. He's on a lot of platforms and there's a lot of ways to support him, and I'm wishing him well. The next batch of comics comes from indie publisher Akachi Comics. And before we start, I have one more Substack comment to share with you. I posted all of these reviews on my Substack before I adapted them to this YouTube video, and Matthew Jones, founder of Akachi Comics, found my post where I reviewed a big pile of comics published under Akachi. He says, I greatly appreciate you taking your time to review my work. This review is extremely helpful and will definitely be taken into consideration. I'm currently rebranding and also began drawing for myself, so I will definitely be reaching out when I am done with my new work. Again, this is what I needed, and thank you. End quote. So I peeped over at his YouTube channel, and guess what? He is learning how to draw. And he's fine-tuned his website and launched some new series, and they all look solid. I'm sharing this because I'm going to be a bit harsher for the next 4 mangas, so this is a real-life spoiler to soften the blow. He's seen what I had to say, he's taken it in good stride, he's working to improve his art, and his business seems headed in a good direction. I wish them all the best, and if I do another video where I review an assortment of indie manga, I'll be sure to include Akachi Comics' newest editions. So let's start with the first, Souls of Chaos Issue 1. Official summary. The Ring of Solomon, said to make demons submit, has long been passed down through the generations. The demons are on the hunt for the last of the Solomon bloodline. Will they succeed, or will our hero Thema get the best of them? End quote. So I chose which of Akachi Comics I want to read and review by sorting the price by low to high. Nothing else mattered. But oh silly, silly me. I should have read the description to know what I was getting into. Because you absolutely need to read the description to know what's happening. Nowhere in the text of Chapter 1 does it say what the Ring of Solomon actually does. I just know from reading this manga that there is a ring, it's a family heirloom, and the main guy's girlfriend keeps eyeballing it. The story made so much more sense once I grabbed the summary for this post. Which sucks. This is something that could have been fixed with a quick rewrite. Even with this shortcoming, this is the strongest of Akachi Comics' work, and I wouldn't mind sticking around for part 2. Visually, it's got all the strong points of a good shonen manga. It's dynamic and expressive, but very clean and easy to read. The only thing I will dock the art for is the similarity in the female character designs. It's fine if the mom and sister look alike, but the sister and the guy's girlfriend also look suspiciously similar. I mean, at least have the girlfriend part her hair the opposite way. Oh my god, it's a little sus. Otherwise, I love how this looks. Just look at the opening page. It's so vibrant. This is an adventure I absolutely want to be a part of. And when shit gets real, that's also taken to really fun heights. The demons are rendered with heavy dark tones and hatching, and the illustrations do a great job of giving that feeling of an otherworldly fear. The artist Cyrus Romanes has absolutely mastered monochrome ink illustration. Just check out his art studio profile. Each piece exhibits an insane technical skill. This makes earlier pages where the characters are just hanging out even more impressive. It shows he knows how to pull back on rendering and simplify the page so he can really flex when shit gets real. The balance of dark and light tones throughout the story, no matter the mood or the setting, are consistently balanced and interesting. Now for the big spoiler, and why I would want to read more of this. But in the last few pages, we get a protagonist shift. Thema, the little sister of Kei, is now taking over as the protagonist after Kei is killed by demons. The story did such a good job of hyping up Kei's status as the shonen protag. His design, personality, and goals feel pretty standard for a shonen protagonist, so it makes it all the more surprising having the rug pulled under you. So even with this initial MacGuffin confusion, it was still an overall solid experience. Next up, we have Vanessa, Part 1. Official summary. A bounty hunter. On the search for answers, Vanessa chases down a widow possessed by a demon. Can't she find her in time before more bodies pile up? End quote. So Vanessa is very much a chapter 1 of a story. There's a whole lot of setting up pieces, which I assume will be paid off later. The problem is I don't have any reason to care about what they're setting up. The art is pretty good. Character design is decent, but what elevates it is the attention to care in the backgrounds and objects. Just look at the way the motorcycle, trees, cityscape, and other background elements are rendered with all of the love. It's definitely good, but it's not strong enough that it compensates for the nothing plot. I think what could save this is if it went more extreme. There's a whole lot of two hot girls fighting, but it never feels bloody enough or sapphic enough to satiate anyone's fetish. And if the intent is to be just an action series, that's fine, I guess. But again, this plot didn't entice me enough to stick around, and the fight scenes weren't crazy enough that I needed to see more. The character designs feel like they are implying something adult. That is, I assume the cleavage or skin-tight outfit would be altered if this was aiming for a younger audience. But an implication of adult is all we get, which is pretty standard. I could go into any comic book shop and find an infinite supply of comics featuring women with this exact body type, showing off this exact amount of skin, getting into high stakes action adventures. And that is what makes this disappointing. You're an indie comic. Give me something different. At least give one of the girls a fat ass, cat ears, a questionable transformation scene, anything to make it stand out. Maybe in chapter 2, a girl with huge cans could show up, or maybe it'll take a jarring left turn into being a vor comic. Give me anything, man. That's what makes the series uniquely disappointing, because I know it could be great. If this showcased any element of deep personal interest other than cool chicks fighting, this would be an all-around decent indie comic. And I use the word fetish, but it doesn't have to be something sexual. Just look at all the completely safe for work indie furry comics that are printing money just by the virtue of being a semi-decent furry comic. There's so many because it's giving people what they want that they can't necessarily find in mainstream art. I want to support indie works that give me something different than what's being market tested to death, but Vanessa is not giving me anything unique. Next up, we have Dessalines. Official summary. Find the balance between peace and rage. Dessalines, a young fighter, channels his uncle's words as he is chased for unknown reasons. This is the story of Andre Mosiah's master. End quote. Of all the comics reviewed today, this one is the most skippable. After reading, I just kind of sat dumbfounded like, what the dink just happened? It was a lot of action whizzing around, but I couldn't parse what was happening or why it was important. I guess the reason to read this comic is to see how bad colors can ruin a comic because, woof, do these stink. Everything's so bright and garish, which is strange because the actual drawings themselves aren't that bad. Here's some sample pages so you can know what I'm talking about. Good anatomy, good character art, decent panel flow, but why is everything so saturated and bright? I guess if you want to declare that you are not a manga, blasting a bunch of MS Paint colors in your reader's face is how you do it. But that's not the only distracting part. Background elements are pretty rough, which makes this look a lot sloppier than this actually is. When you use the tree brush or the rock brush for monochrome manga, it's easier to make it all blend together, but in color you risk exposing this for the jarring mishmash of elements it actually is. To add to the hurt, we actually do see what this manga would have looked like in monochrome. The opening splash page is kept in grayscale, and it's way sharper than anything else in this chapter. You see what I mean about the rocks? They don't particularly stand out as the artist using the rock brush, since it's all monochrome and it all smooths together. Anyway, I give this a skip it out of 10. And the final of my Akachi Comics review, Denise. Official summary. It's easy to love Denise for her charming character, and even more for her captivating story of zombies, death, betrayal, and the fight for what's right. Denise was like every other girl until she was ripped from her home, experimented on, and almost murdered. In her quest for answers, she continues to unlock deeper parts of her abilities as a necromancer. End quote. I will start by saying this art is absolutely, unquestionably gorgeous. If this ran with Shonen Jump or Kodansha, it would be forever canonized as a standout, beautiful manga. A manga that would forever make numerous top 20 most beautiful manga listicles. A manga that even non-manga readers would be urged to consume just on the basis of how gosh darn gorgeous it looks. Here's a few sample pages so you get what I mean. They keep up this beautiful ink and marker approach for the entire 60 pages. The world is fully realized. We see cityscapes, abandoned buildings, farms, forests, all given a tremendous amount of love and care. There are none of the standard manga making shortcuts to be found here. Every panel is an enormous flex of skill. And the 60 pages is important, because at the halfway point, I peeked at the PDF to see how much was left, and let out an audible groan realizing I still had 30 more pages of this horseshit. I will say it again. The art is incredible, but this plot absolutely blows. This is the only one of Akachi's comics I struggled to finish. The tremendous art did not make up for the awful writing. If I want to look at cool art, there's easier ways that don't require me to be mentally locked into a subpar comic. If Vanessa and Dessalines were just a middling shrug of a story, Denise was actively difficult to read. It's real bad, you guys. The comic starts with quite the info dump, to the point where I feel like I'm getting the previous 5 seasons of a TV show summarized. The actual story doesn't start until page 11, when the narration announces, and this is where her story begins. But don't worry, there's still plenty of other random narration infodumps to be found throughout its 60-page runtime, and the character dialogue and writing stinks just as much. The main girl sure is quirky, and she loves using cutesy little abbreviation and nicknames for everything, which is irritating on its own, but this being a fantasy series just adds an extra layer of shit to keep up with. And when she's taking a break from giving adorable pet names to everything, she's strutting around like a Marvel character who wandered off the set of a Forspoken trailer parody. I had the unique misfortune of learning about the Forspoken trailer parodies a few weeks before consuming this manga, so it was easy to imagine the protagonist punctuating plenty of sentences with, "Yeah, okay, that's something I do now," And what's worse is there's two very specific instances where this line would be completely appropriate. Twice. Twice! The protagonist randomly gets a new power with no explanation, just in time to save the day. So I want to give you the ultimate Denise page. It has it all. Quippy dialogue, character interactions that go nowhere, half-assed narration to speed run through what would be the plot, all inexplicably held together with stunning artwork. In short, I hate it. I fucking hate it. The fact that this was the worst written of Akagi Comics is trapped in the one with the best art makes it all the more painful. I gave Dessalines a skip it out of 10, so Denise is a use a time machine to actively stop yourself from reading it out of 10. So, if any of these last four manga looked interesting to you, they can be found at akachicomics.com. You'll also find in the description their YouTube channel. There's plenty of cozy streams worth checking out. And the final manga I will be reviewing today is Dark Lights, the OEL manga written by RDC World, aka Mark Phillips, and illustrated by Giorgia Lenzi, with Pamela Dima as assistant. One chapter is currently available, and you can read it on the RDC World website after signing up for their $5 support tier. An anime adaptation for HBO is currently in production, more on that later. Official summary. In an alternate version of modern-day America, every person in the hood is born with a superhuman ability. Some have impressive abilities: control of fire, manifestation of clones, invisibility, flight, telekinesis, teleportation. Others have minor abilities. They can make water boil. They can summon a light breeze. They can track runaway cats really, really well. A vast range of powers have made the people special, but there's a catch. These powers only manifest at night. This means that from dusk until dawn, the hood is a dangerous otherworld, where gangs wage epic battles with powers so strong full city blocks can be eradicated in a matter of minutes, where the average citizen hunkers down in fear, knowing that as long as the violence stays in the hood, the police will be of no help. But as soon as the sun comes up, everyone is back to normal. Back to work, back to the grind. Welcome to the world of Dark Lights. End quote. There are little cues that mangaka can give to show that they think a little bit deeper about their world. The two biggest for me is giving everyone distinct footwear and giving every character a unique room. This is because I'm into interior design and I like shoes, so that's naturally where my eye goes. In either case, it's not necessarily an indicator of low skill if every character is wearing Chuck Taylors and lives in a prison dorm. The setting may not call for that unique flair, or it's a time or a budget constraint. I've used plenty of default Clip Studio rooms for my characters. Sometimes you just need to show a room, and your time budget is better spent elsewhere. It's a great example of Josh Sippy's snapshot theory. Let me show you the pages where you see Protag-kun's room. Now, let's zoom in on his desk. I didn't even notice that he has a Dragon Ball poster the first time I read this, and this in no way feels like an afterthought. I could absolutely see this character thinking Goku kicks enough ass that he earned a spot next to his PC monitor. As for the shoes, Dark Lights does this perfectly too. For example, here's the first two major characters we meet in Dark Lights. Demetrius and Abel are old friends, but they have deep ideological differences. Their shoes, their outfits, the way they carry themselves, all tell the audience how different they are. Every character, every scene has this richness and depth that makes the world feel fully realized. And satisfyingly enough, the detail about shoes is an important plot point. See, this is why I love OEL manga. You would not get a scene like this in Japanese-made manga. I was then all the more surprised when researching this to find that the artist for this is an Italian woman. There's countless little details that felt very true to life that in no way indicated that this artist was attacking this from an outsider's perspective. And disclaimer, I've got an outsider's perspective no matter how you slice it, so that is my bias. Giorgia Lenzi is also an interesting choice based on her portfolio. Before Darklight, she was a concept artist and character designer at Sume Art. That means a company that makes officially licensed waifu figures commissioned her for turnaround sheets, concept art, and promotional images. Here's a small sample from her art station. So the concept art discussion for Dark Lights went, okay, I need my manga to look 25% My Hero Academia, 10% Legend of Korra. This artist could deliver this request with microscopic precision. This is someone with unique mastery of different mainstream shonen art styles, and it definitely shows in Dark Lights. Now, I want to pivot to what I did not realize. I'll kick this section off by clarifying that I am not black, and I feel pretty gosh darn peeved about excessive purity politics and fandom. But I still like hearing different sociology of the media analysis. The same way my ears will perk up every time I'm in a biker bar, and the two biggest guys start shoving each other after an hour of passionately arguing whether Goku could beat Superman. I don't care who wins, but I am interested in how it plays out. Anyway, in Torin Ello's review of Dark Lights on Medium, he brings up the single-parent household as a hood trope. He says, I'm not sure if this is a good or a bad thing, but I know it's reality for a lot of folks who grew up in the hood or in poverty. Whether it be through violence or crime, or both, a parent, often the mother, is left raising the child on their own, It's exciting to see a possible reality portrayed within media where the single parent and child thrive without the other parent present, but I anticipate that it may depict the single parent as being overwhelmed and struggling to make ends meet, and the child, Vincent, is being neglected and possibly misbehaving. End quote. This is a valid point, and it went completely over my head when I read this. Vincent's home life, him constantly in detention, blowing off his homework, none of that registered as him being a bad example, and whether or not media needs to be a good example is another discussion. I just thought it was cool seeing a character whose high school life was a little closer to my own. I might be more inclined to raise an eyebrow if Vincent was the only black character, but this is a series with an all-black cast. No one character needs to stand out as the model minority. So if Vincent's a little too rough around the edges, his friend Zeke can balance the energy in the room. Same for Vincent being an electricity-themed superhero. I had forgotten the all-black superheroes have electric powers trope while reading this, and a black reader might be quicker to pick up on this. But this is a story where everyone's black, and everyone's got superpowers, so Vincent having electric powers didn't stand out as a flagrant stereotype. Now, this is really my only critique, and it might not be a bad thing at all. But little details about this manga were cleared up when I read the summary. I didn't realize that everyone's powers only come out at night, or the specification that everyone born in the hood has powers. I think this manga assumes that you found this through RDC World and read the summary or heard his elevator pitch before reading the manga, which, fair. I am definitely the outlier here. I found out about this series while on the Apple Black fandom wiki, mindlessly clicking around looking for new info on my celebrity crush, White Manga. And I saw that there was an OEL manga I hadn't read yet. I've never heard of an RDC World before this, sorry. But even without knowing the specifics about this world, this was still a very fun read. There was never any confusion about the plot. For example, 50 Vicious and JJ get into a scuffle at school. Outside of school, their fight escalates to them using their powers. I figured there was a reason why they didn't unleash their powers at school, and didn't realize that they were physically unable. What's more is that before this fight, there's a clear shot of the moon. So the story does tell the reader that nighttime is important, and it's not directly shouted in our face. In any chapter 1 of a story, I will always prefer a moment of confusion to over-explaining the lore. I'm also not clear on what came first. Is this manga being made as a tie-in for an upcoming HBO anime, or was it made as a sort of pilot episode for a non-existent anime, and then pitched to different networks before getting accepted by HBO? There's also no word on when the anime is coming out, but snoop on social media long enough and you will find work-in-progress crumbs here and there. Dark Lights was announced in 2021, the first chapter was published October 2023, and no word on the next update. I know these things take time, but I hope this isn't stuck in development hell. This was a solid first chapter, so I hope we'll get to read more soon. Well, that wraps it up for today. If this video does well, I would love to come back for round 2 and share my thoughts on a new batch of obscure comics and manga. Likes, comments, and shares are deeply appreciated, since reviewing indie art with a smaller fan base is always a bigger gamble. And if you want more of my reviews before they hit YouTube, definitely check me out on Substack. You'll find me at taperclip.substack.com. I test drive a lot of my YouTube scripts there and embarrassingly blog about my life, so it's a great way to deepen our parasocial relationship. Thanks for watching. I love you.